Okay, welcome. My name is Spencer Vogel, and this is the English unit of the multidisciplinary integrated unit titled The Exploration of Space. Now, you've seen three other subject specific units in this group. You saw mathematics, you saw physical education, and history. And they all had to do with essentially the American space program and some key constituent parts. Now, in math, you learned how to calculate the distances of the planets. In phys ed, you learned about the physical requirements for becoming an astronaut. And in history, you learned about the general history of astronomy. Now, the English unit is less concerned with the hows, meaning how do we get to space? How far do we have to go? It's less concerned with those technicalities and more concerned with assessing the whys, the motivations, the wherefores, meaning why should we go to space? Should we go to space? And if we do go to space, who should pay for it? Because it's an extremely expensive endeavor, probably in many ways the most expensive human endeavor. So the English unit is going to get you into those murkier, more conceptual questions of ethics, priorities, how we value things over other things, and it's going to most importantly teach you how to assess a rhetorical argument by teaching you the three modes of Aristotelian persuasion. Okay, and we'll get to that later. But just starting off on this slide here, I want you to direct your attention to the image below the byline. In the image, you have Old Glory in the background. I think you got Thomas Jefferson, maybe, founding father figure at the top. You got Boy Scouts on the bottom, and you have an astronaut right in the middle of them. Now, this image was taken from the early '60s, late '50s, early '60s, and basically it's a picture with a message, and I think you could classify it as propaganda. Clearly, it's saying something. It's saying that going to space is part of our national destiny as Americans, and that it is an inherently useful endeavor. Now, not everyone agrees with that, and we are going to, throughout this unit, assess who has the best argument regarding whether or not we should continue as a country to fund space exploration. Does it make as much sense as it used to? Okay, so let's go on here. Now, it's just a little thing to get you thinking. This is an excerpt from a speech made by President John F. Kennedy, and this was made in '62. And this was when he was making this speech when he was trying to sell the space program because it was an enormously expensive undertaking for the whole country. The budget was huge, especially by the standards of the time. And he was trying to sell the general public on the idea that we needed to go to the moon and that it would be useful to go to the moon. Now, if you read through the quote, and you can read through it on your own, it's a very long quote, you'll notice that he is appealing to our feelings as patriotic Americans to make his point. He's saying we don't choose to do things as Americans because they're easy. On the contrary, we choose to do them because they're hard, and that the best goals are the ones that are difficult to achieve. And sometimes you attempt to do some things because you can, or because they're there. Like the classic quip about the men who scaled Mount Everest. They were asked, why did you climb it? And they said, because it was there. Okay? Space exploration has historically had a very similar attitude toward it, that we do these things to see if we can, to push ourselves. And we're going to assess whether that is a legitimate motive. Is that something that we ought to be doing with public money? And it's a difficult argument. Okay. Now, what, of course, is the major factor for why this is a difficult question? You got it. Money. Okay? Money, national money, the national debt, the budget. Okay? Budget budgetary concerns lead us to our essential question of this unit, which is, are the benefits gained from the United States space program worth the tax dollars spent on it? Okay, so the question is a specific one. It's not, do we get any benefit from space exploration? Because I think that's a pretty obvious yes, we do. The question is, are the benefits that we get worth the time, money, and human capital we spend getting there? And that is a much more difficult question to answer. And that is the one that we're going to be exploring. So keep that essential question in mind. That will come up constantly in this unit. Okay? A little background data for you about NASA. NASA equals the National Aeronautics and Space Administration. Okay, it was begun in the early 40s during the World War II war effort. Okay, there was the U.S. government was funding a lot of things as part of the war effort, and NASA was one of them. It started as a small laboratory, basically investigating ways to fight the Germans and the Japanese, and wasn't terribly notable in the public mind until a few decades later, really. One of the things that kicked NASA into high gear and brought it into the public imagination was when the USSR, what's now, remember the USSR was a big conglomerate of Soviet Slavic states. Now the USSR is basically Russia and a lot of other states surrounding Russia. But the USSR launched Sputnik, which was the first artificial satellite, meaning something that orbits the Earth, that something man-made that orders the Earth, orbits the Earth, and it that launching by the Russians caused an immediate feeling of the need to kick into high gear our space program. The reason being the Cold War. In your studies in social studies, you should be aware of what the Cold War was. It was basically a war where no shots were fired, but there was a great deal of distrust between the two major superpowers of the post World War II world, which was the United States and the Soviet Union. NASA, after Sputnik, wanted to answer back, and President Kennedy helped ring in the new, most famous mission NASA's ever conducted, which was the Apollo 11 mission in 1969, which was the first time mankind had gotten on the moon. You probably know the one small step for man, one giant leap for mankind quote. Very famous, very important, enormous scientific value, but there was also a deep cultural and political value to the fact that the United States got there first, and we put our flag, meaning that we essentially regarded ourselves as representatives for all mankind, or at least the so-called free world, and that we got there before the communist superpower did. It was very significant. It was seen as the triumph of the free world. Now, the space program is under the Trump administration currently is supposed to be getting another kind of kick in the pants, um, with President Trump saying that a new goal would be a manned mission to Mars, which up until now has been very, very kind of out of the question. But our technology is enabling us to get closer and closer to that goal. So once again, that sounds nice. Going to Mars sounds pretty cool, but what issue is always rearing its ugly head? You got it, money. Okay, so the cost of space exploration. Just a few facts for you. NASA's total projected budget for 2019 is 19.5 billion. Now the 19.5 is just funding that is specifically given to NASA from the congressional budget. It also receives 400 billion in supplementary funds. Okay, so 19 and a half, add 400 to get the real cost. Okay, that, and frankly, that's a lot more than you can count on your fingers, but in terms of, in comparison with, say, the defense budget, it ain't much. Okay, so NASA is expensive, but compared to other American endeavors, it's actually not comparable in many ways. Okay, now NASA themselves claim that they have a direct positive impact on our economy. They say that for every dollar spent on NASA, $10 is added to the overall U.S. economy. You're going to be assessing claims such as those when you go through the sources and determine whether you believe that to be true or not. Other economists that do not work for NASA might dispute that claim. Okay, now um, Trump administration is trying to take away from a lot of the tax dollars spent on NASA by opening up public-private partnerships, which is a kind of a fancy way of saying that it's going to have cost splitting between NASA and for-profit companies that are doing space exploration for money, for new projects to make money. This is a very exciting prospect for many people interested in the subject. It's something that was kind of unthinkable a few decades ago, but that's kind of the future of where things are going. Now, remember that when you talk about the cost of something done by a government, you're not just talking about the costs, the direct costs spent. You're not just talking about the 19.5 billion plus the 400. You are also talking about the things that you don't do because you put your money into NASA, and that in economics is called an opportunity cost. Okay, in free market economics, an opportunity cost is the things that you give up when you choose a specific way to spend your money. The opportunity cost of space exploration, public space exploration, could be enormous. We don't really know. Opportunity costs are in many ways unknown factors. Okay? So when you're assessing arguments, remember to ask yourself, okay, this might be something that would be good to do, but what else could we have done if we were to use the money for a different thing? Very important to remember that question at all times. So, what do we do? Okay, meaning by so what do we do? How do we assess this? Should we continue to fund things? We return to our essential question: are the benefits gained from the United States space program worth the tax dollars spent on it? That's the question you guys will be answering. Um, and that is the core issue of this unit. Okay? We go to the essential question and we weigh the arguments. And when we weigh the arguments, we use a very specific collection of rhetorical tools invented by a very important man by the name of Aristotle. You should see him right there at the bottom of the page. Aristotle, probably the second most famous philosopher of all ancient Greece. His teacher Plato and Plato's teacher Socrates would probably be the most famous. Aristotle wrote about everything. He paid a great deal of attention to rhetoric. And of course, rhetoric is the art of persuading people. Rhetoric is what we employ anytime we are trying to get someone else to adopt our opinion, okay? To believe as we do. It's one of the most basic and important uses of speech, okay? According to Aristotle, there are three methods of persuasion, also known as rhetorical appeals. The first one is pathos, an appeal to an emotion. Earlier on in the presentation, you saw that propaganda painting where all the patriotic Americans were looking at the flag and surrounding the astronaut. Patriotism is a feeling, it's an emotion. Patriotism is an affection for one's country, a love of one's country. Love is an emotion. When you appeal to the emotions of another human being, you are making a pathos appeal. You are saying, you should agree with me because we share a common emotion, and that is important. Second, ethos. This one's a little trickier when it comes to memorizing. Ethos is related to ethics, but in this context, it more means an appeal to the credibility of the speaker. In the modern world, we would call that an appeal to credentials. Okay, so if you were to make an argument about NASA and say that NASA is not worth funding because everyone running it is actually a lizard person from Planet Z, and they have evil intentions. And if someone were to ask you, well, where'd you hear that? And you said, oh, well, I heard it from some guy on YouTube. A guy on YouTube doesn't necessarily have a great deal of credibility, especially not compared with, say, a astrophysicist or an expert on the US budget. Credibility or credentials is how we determine if a speaker making an argument actually knows what he's talking about. It's a very important logical appeal or rhetorical appeal, and it's pretty essential in everyday life. People should know what they're talking about. Finally, logos, an appeal to logic or fact. Logos is probably the appeal that you're most likely to be using when you are working on this unit, because everything that you're doing has to have citations, sources. So if you are using numbers to answer the essential question, you need to tell me what those numbers mean and where you got them from and how they apply. So logos is an appeal to logic. It's basic reasoning. Okay? These are important. You must memorize these. These are essentially the crux of the entire unit. And beyond learning the content of the space program, these are the most key elements of the unit. So return to this, look them up, get involved with them, make them your own, take ownership of these core concepts. So, what's next? This is what we're going to be doing. You're going to read and annotate two editorials, one that says yes, we should continue to fund the space program, one that says no, we should not. And we need to, after determining what they're saying, we need to determine what modes of persuasion they're using to make their arguments. So are they giving us facts, in which case they're doing a logos appeal? Are they saying that patriotic Americans should support a space program? In that case, they're using a pathos appeal. We need to analyze not just what they're saying, but how they're saying it. Okay? Number two, we're going to write in small groups 4 originally worded arguments that answer our essential question: should we continue to fund NASA? According to your assigned position. And here's the tough part: you will be assigned a position, a logical position, meaning I'm going to tell you whether you believe we should keep funding NASA or not. And I know that you might not agree with the one you're assigned, but in rhetoric, it's extremely important to be able to argue both sides of an argument, because that's the way you are able to assess your argumentative opponent. Okay? That's a pretty essential element of debating. All right. Then the culmination of everything is going to be a class debate where I will moderate, and the yeses, we should continue to fund NASA, they will be together, and the noes will be together, and we will have a rhetorical battle royale over the essential question, and everyone will have their 4 originally worded arguments. They'll have source citations, and it will be excellent, and we will get to the bottom of this, our essential question. After we have analyzed everything, we'll take a vote, a secret ballot vote, to see what people really think and to see if people changed their opinion because of the arguments. And then we'll create a page at Quora.com which shows the results of our debate. Quora.com is a great little debate tool website, moderated so you get minimal trolling, and we'll set up a page for our class debate so we can share with the general public what we came up with. And that is it. That is the progression of this unit. And I thank you for listening. And I hope you enjoyed it. And I hope you're excited to work on this project with me. And now it is time to explore.